Gaming is in session. Gaming Court today. We have The Defendant Song in the Smoke Rekindled Edition, developed by 17-Bit Studios, who joined us on the podcast not long ago. The game comes in at a price of $29.99, and it is facing the charges. One count of wishing you were here, one count of finding out the hard way, and one count of putting it all together. So, for the first charge, we take the defendant takes a stand. Wishing you were here. So, Song in the Smoke, it's a game about your wits against the wilderness. You're all alone, braving the elements, and not only surviving the wilderness, but you're taming it. It's got really large maps, it's full of interesting locations and hidden paths and ample surprises, and your exploration is often rewarded, but also just as often, it's a costly endeavor. All on your own, you have to make sure that you are able to create the things that you need in this wilderness, survive the nighttime encounters. You have to make sure you build a campfire. You have to make sure that there's no predators around. You have to make sure you're ready to venture away from a base camp. And all these little elements of the survival game really make the incentive structure tick in the game for me. And it places the goal of survival past the post of just surviving, which a lot of these survival games have, and it puts it right in the camp of survive today so you can succeed tomorrow. So despite all the loneliness as I'm going through these large environments, I did wish that I, at some times when I was in danger, that I had some kind of help, but I felt accomplished in the end when I used my own wits to, build up a day's worth of supplies, find elements, scrap them together, repair my armor, create new tonics, and then completely discover gameplay mechanics and elements as I was readying myself that night to prepare for war the next day. The requirements to even survive the night are just heavy enough to keep me concerned but not overwhelmed. And so as a whole, the whole survival element of Song in the Smoke ends up being great, and it's an enjoyable feat, something I typically don't like. And so for the account of wishing you were here, I find Song in the Smoke guilty.
So I'm curious, Alex. I think there's a fine line with survival games where you can be immersed and you could be into the story and into the survival element, or it could be a collection of tasks that are very kind of painful and monotonous that you must do just to progress in the game, but it's not an enjoying collection of things you must do. Building fires, making your own weapons, upgrading weapons, looking for berries and other resources. Where do you think Song in the Smoke sits in that line? Do you think they handle that well?
I'll get to this a bit in the second segment, but I just say they do it well. Normally, I hate this stuff. Normally, I used to love to play Fallout. I'd play Fallout on survival mode, and I'd get mad at trying to find food and ammunition and things wearing out. I couldn't play Breath of the Wild because I hated those mechanics. But in this game, somehow they have just the right amount of upkeep and maintenance required of you, of things that you have to watch out, like your body temperature and how much food you have, how much sleep you have, are you poisoned, are you bleeding? All these things get handled very well in a way that isn't frustrating for me. And if it's too easy, you can always turn up the difficulty to really bring those elements to the forefront. But with that, I'll go ahead into our second charge. Song in the Smoke is facing the second charge of finding out the hard way. So, for better or worse, Song in the Smoke is a real game with a pretty original design, but it's made for the ground up in VR. So while there are survival games out there in the flat space, this is one of the first really true survival games that I enjoyed that I feel like got it right. Song in the Smoke Rekindled Edition has demands of you. However, in meeting those demands, you sometimes run into troubles, and sometimes the troubles are intentional. It's supposed to be difficult at times, but sometimes it's frustrating in the sense that you encounter gameplay elements in inorganic ways. There were times when I knew there was something I should be doing with something like a stick. I could grab it with both hands, but I didn't know until I saw on YouTube that I'm supposed to break those apart to create smaller sticks that I can use to more readily build a campfire or build things around my campfire. The tutorials are meant to be emergent, and I applaud them for that. I hate having screens pop up in front of me, and I just sit and watch them, and I have things laid out for me. I love interactive tutorials that kind of guide me in the right direction. But because they're emergent, because they're so subdued, it's easy to miss these important elements. And there were times when I would take a different route along a path. And I would find this tutorial maybe an hour after I actually needed it or after I had found it on YouTube for some reason. Um, all that said, I do think because of this issue, when you first start the game, you should start the game on the easiest difficulty level, because that's one that allows you to, if you don't grasp all of the gameplay elements, you're not going to be severely punished for it, right? You're not going to suddenly die because you overheated and didn't realize it. One other thing that I have to mention is that first time playing the game, I got about 2 hours into it and I forgot to save at a campfire. I was killed by a newly introduced gameplay element. Won't spoil it too much, but sometimes nighttime can be dangerous, I'll just say. And I had to dial it an hour, 2 hours back in game progress because I forgot to save. I understand not wanting to have autosave. It adds tension to it, but maybe at least autosave at the start of a new level would be something worth implementing. And then as you go throughout that level, you have to intentionally save at campfires. Those are the frustrating elements. Those are things that I think could be fine-tuned a little bit, but they still do most of it right. So it's hard to complain too much, but certainly auto-saving when you start a level would make a huge difference here. So for all the frustrations I found, despite that, I think the balance is pretty good. So on the case of finding out the hard way, I find Song in the Smoke guilty.
So I too played this game. I started in medium difficulty though, and I will admit it was a rough go because I still don't know what killed me. And now that you started with easy, do you feel that you've learned everything? So when you move to medium, you now know the elements. You just maybe need to be a bit sharper. Like, do you think there's still going to be a learning curve moving up a difficulty?
There will be a learning curve in the sense of learning how to manage things, but there won't be a learning curve in learning how to mitigate things. In the sense that if I'm too cold, I know how to make myself warm. If I'm too hot, I know how to cool myself off. Because I've played with those. There's a bit more grace in the easy mode, so I could learn these mechanics. So certainly, things like if you're bleeding, things like if you're poisoned, things like if it's nighttime and you don't have campfire, you don't have fire nearby to help you out. These things, you learn how to manage it in the easy mode. You're not severely punished by it. That way you can go through the harder difficulty and really ramp up that tension, but you feel capable of handling it, which, certainly takes a game to the next level in terms of fun.
Yeah, I got one more question, quick one. When for the listeners, for the people who haven't played it, who are currently playing it, and they hit a roadblock, did you find any resources or what did you do to try to figure out what is this piece of the puzzle they're wanting me to overcome or how to overcome the obstacle?
So one thing I'll note is that each stage before you go into what's officially really the boss fight, there is like a hallucination that you have where an old lady shows you how to do something. And it seems initially like it's not making too much sense. Sometimes it's pretty on the nose, like put a mushroom on an arrow and feed it to a boar. But sometimes it's things like, oh, she's holding a stick with one hand, then she holds it with two hands. And if you didn't know, that's how you can block with your club. If you didn't know that, you wouldn't know what she's showing you, and it wouldn't make much sense. So I picked up a lot of things by actually the Song in the Smoke website. The developers on their website, they have some tutorials you can watch that are pretty quick of like, some hot tips you might want to learn getting into Song in the Smoke to make it better. They show you how to build a campfire, how to make a really good campfire, what it means around the campfire. Because there's certain things like you need a bunch of small sticks before you can have a campfire big enough to use big sticks. And then you need a bunch of big sticks to make one big enough to use even the large sticks. Those are things that I didn't quite understand until I saw some videos. So certainly go to their website, watch some of their quick tip videos. They explain things like the durability system, which, a little bit more care into how this stuff is introduced in the game organically would be nice. I'd never felt too hampered by it, though, but that's because I was playing on easy mode.
Cool.
All right. And for the final charge of putting it all together, when Song in the Smoke is at its worst, it feels basic and functional. And that's a backhanded compliment. It's not necessarily a bad thing that the game works when it's at its worst. But at its worst, you're doing things in a VR game. You're playing a game in VR, doing standard VR stuff, grabbing stuff, mixing stuff. But often, very often, it's better than that. The exploration and the experimentation don't feel forced, but they feel natural, which is very rare in a game. I I never felt like I was combining stuff because I had to figure out what was going on. I did it because I wanted to, and it felt natural to throw elements into the mortar and pestle, grind them up, and see what it does. It felt natural to find new food, eat it, experiment with cooking it, and eating that food. It felt natural to build new things around my campfire and see what it's like to make a new cloak or a new quiver, things like that. It's very difficult to do. A lot of these games become resource management. This game isn't quite resource management, but it still feels like survival. So I appreciate that. Um, yeah, I'm not anxious going through the game, grabbing these elements, putting stuff together, testing out new gameplay things, and the variable pace of the game also allows me to experiment on my own time. The thing that I really enjoyed with Song in the Smoke was that there were days when I would just make a trip and it's the sun comes up, I'm going to go out, I'm going to hunt a few animals, I'm going to skin their hide so I have that equipment. I'm going to go find sticks so I have enough to build a campfire, and then I'm going to go gather rocks so I'm ready to build another campfire somewhere else. So everything that you're doing when you're skinning an animal, when you're hunting, you're spending time. And time becomes an important management because you want to make sure you're doing things during the day so you don't get caught in danger at night. But if you do find yourself out in the middle of the night and you have a torch, you run into some really interesting elements, again, that happen organically and they feel rewarding when you find it, but they're also kind of thrilling and spooky when you encounter them as well. All these things kind of come together where it's almost like you're never in a part of the game doing something you're not supposed to be doing. You're always being rewarded for that exploration, and the environments are just varied enough to where they feel familiar, they feel comfortable, but you're still seeing something new. You get just lost enough sometimes to where it's kind of scary, but you do have a map to get you back to where you want to go. And although these environments aren't huge, they can be daunting at just the right level. So the whole thing is they put it all together and they balance it so well to where everything's hitting all the notes just the right way that nothing becomes really, off-putting, game-ending, game-breaking, and it all just works together and it's cohesive. And the best element of this was when I was finally feeling like I was overcoming the combat, mastering the combat, becoming great at the combat to where the game was too easy. I defeat one of the bosses, and I used all my equipment on the boss, and then I go to exit the level, and bam, I'm hit with a cougar and a lion and a screecher all at the same time, and they're flanking me, and I'm freaking out because I have no more arrows, and I have a club, and the club breaks on the first hit, and suddenly I'm clambering up rocks as fast as I can to get to a safe spot so I can figure out what the heck I'm going to do to get past all these animals. And it was just such a thrilling experience, and I really felt like I was in the wilderness and the animals were against me, and I love it when a game takes things to the next level like that. So, for the charge of putting it all together, certainly I find Song in the Smoke guilty.
So, do you think you are now better prepared to survive in real life? Like if you go camping?
Probably not. I mean, I might be better at building a fire, potentially. Like that might be something I'm better at because I think, oh, a lot of small sticks make a big stick. But they had flint rocks that you can crack, which I'm not going to be able to start a fire if I don't have flint rocks or matches. No, I don't feel better prepared to survive in the wild because I don't know if those berries are poisonous or not. But maybe I'll be better at shooting an arrow at a cougar.
Look for those Marion berries. All right, let's go to the final verdict.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. Final verdict, gaming court finds Song in the Smoke on the final charge of being a game worthy of your time. Guilty.